Hello everyone, this is Eddie Hamilton. I'm the film editor on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And to celebrate the home entertainment release, I thought I would spend some time with Matt Fury and talk about the timelines that I have shared with everybody. When I was starting out as an editor, I would absolutely love to have seen these, but it wasn't possible back then to share them with people. So it's really great that we're in a position where we can put these out in the world and sort of talk through them so everyone can get a sense of what we get up to on these movies. You'll notice the reels are different version numbers. So reel 1, for example, is version 9.4, reel 2, 9.1, and then reel 4, 9.2. So the reason that we have these different versions is each whole number is a milestone screening that we would have done. And when I'm assembling the movie, I will basically call it version 0.5. when I'm still trying to fill in the blanks. And sometimes what we'll do is we will make subcaps in the timeline, which are the correct duration for the scenes in the script based on a page for a minute of screen time in the script. So I'll actually plan out the entire movie before we start filming, just with captions in the timeline. And then as the scenes come in and we assemble them and we sketch them out, then I put them into the reels. And so slowly throughout the process of filming, the subcap clips get replaced with actual assembled scenes. And so version 1 then is the first assembly, and then version 2 might be the first director's cut, and then version 3 might be the version that we do our first friends and family. And then in between that, when we make small iterations to reels, each reel of the film is around 2,000 feet of film or 20 minutes of screen time. The reason we split them up is so that I can be working on one chunk and my team can be working on another chunk of the movie, and we can turn over 20-minute chunks of the film to the sound effects team, the visual effects team, the music team, and they can start diving in and working on that stuff. So what we'll do is when I make a change to a reel, I'll bump up one point version, as it were, so that then if it gets turned over to sound, that becomes version 9.1. And then if I make another change, then it gets turned over and that's 9.2. So in this particular case, reel 1 would have had the most changes because you can see it's version 9.4. And for reel 2, I only made one small tweak from the last turnover, but these are the locked versions. So these are the finished reels, which have been tidied up. And so it all looks quite neat. And also you'll see there's certain tracks there where I've got them soloed with a little green icon. And those are the stems. So you'll see there's a dialogue stem, there's a Foley stem, an effects stem, a crowd stem, a background stem, and a music stem. And those are 5/1 stems from the final mix. And I like to keep those live on the timeline so that we can play the finished, or whatever the current version of the sound mix is, to the team, to the director, the producer, if they come in. And then when I'm making changes to the reel, we kind of start shredding the timeline. But I've always got the kind of mixed version of the movie so I can make transitions and make adjustments to the mix, which then goes back to the sound team. So on our first preview, we would have our first temp mix there, and those tracks get laid in. And then on our second preview, all those sound mix tracks, stems from the first preview are kind of chopped up by me with lots of mini crossfades to kind of hide the joins. That goes back to the sound team. They conform on the Pro Tools at their end, and then we remix. So it's evolving, but that's why I keep the stems live on the timeline. And then usually what I'll do is I'll mute all the sound effects that I've added. Now I've unmuted them for the sake of this demonstration, but usually they would be grayed out so they don't accidentally play, but I've unmuted them for the purposes of this. So what's interesting here, if you want to see the top half of the timeline, is all picture. And you can see we're quite careful about labeling all the tracks so that everybody on the team knows what they're looking at. V1 is just clean dailies without visual effects. What we try and do is we try and put resizes and respeeds on V2 and V3, which does work when we're turning over to the DI, but sometimes the timeline gets a bit cluttered. But that's the theory. Avid effects, VFX on V4, which means the kind of temp comps that I do, but sometimes you'll see they'll be on V3. It doesn't always work out like that, but the first 4 video tracks are kind of up for debate. And sometimes you'll see I've stacked up different options there where even right towards the end, I still have other options for each take stacked underneath, just in case Chris McQuarrie says to me, hey, do you remember that other alternate take we had? Can I just look at that again? then I can just match frame on that and call it up. So we don't always compress the timeline completely. V5 is VFX shots, so that's finished VFX shots there. V6 is VFX shots update. So that's a track that we add quite late in the process when there are shots coming into the digital intermediate quite late. And you can actually see there that there's a clip there on V6, and then there's a punch in on the grade for that shot. So it would have been sent off to the DI, regraded, and they sent us a little patch there for the top track V16. V7 color, I'll put color correction clips where I need to nudge the color away from the dailies grade. V9 is edit notes. So what I do on that track is whenever I want to make the team aware of something, I'll put a subcap there with a note, like a VFX note saying needs tracers added, or muzzle flashes need to be added, or please paint out this rig or whatever, just so that the VFX team understand what we're trying to do. The letterbox track is where we put a letterbox if we're doing an export, but there's no letterbox on this because what we tend to use is we put a letterbox on the video output settings of the Media Composer. So it's kind of baked in the whole time. Now, on Dead Reckoning Part 2, we have got IMAX sections. So we will actually use the letterbox to have a 239 certain sections and then 1.9 for other sections, which is what we did on Fallout, actually. VFX numbers are there. So little subcaps there, which have all got markers on. Can you see all the little green markers? So there's a subcap, which is a number, which is displayed in the top left of the screen. And then there's a little green marker there, and the markers change color. So when the shot's been turned over, they're yellow. And then when we get versions back, they go orange. And then when a final comes in, we make them green, something like that. So we can track the status of the shots. But obviously, this is the finished timeline. So everything on the VFX layer is green and all the markers are green. So we know that they're finals. I have version zeros cut in on V12, which is really important actually, because it shows you how many frames you've actually turned over to the vendor. So if you're trimming in the timeline, when you hit the edge of the version 0, you know that you've used up all the handles that you've turned over. So if I need more than that, I need to alert the VFX team to pull more handles. But we really try our best to never do that because it causes headaches for everybody. I try and make sure that when we turn over, we stick with the handles that we've used. And then VFX versions are up there. So what I like to do is stack all the versions of a VFX shot in a collapsed clip so that I can step into it and go through different versions of the VFX. The other thing that I do is, so on these movies, we work at Ultra HD resolution, which is 3840 by 2160. So it's not quite cinema 4K, but it's TV 4K. And we use an Avid resolution called DNX HRLB, which is the kind of lowest bitrate version of the Ultra HD codec. And the way that the Avid encodes it, as I understand it, is that it's kind of 4 DNX 36 quads. So it's 144 megabits a second, which is only a little bit. It's only 25% more than DNX 115, which is the kind of usual resolution and bitrate that everyone uses when they're cutting in high definition as opposed to ultra high definition. But what I love about this is you get 4 times more resolution with only 25% more storage. So in my mind, it's worth it. And the quality is outstandingly good. But what I do is when the VFX shots come in, I ask for the vendor to deliver the shots in DNX HR SQ, which is the higher quality codec. So as the VFX shots come in, the actual quality of the image in the Avid timeline goes up to even higher. So it goes from LB, low bitrate, to SQ. And so by the time we are previewing and doing screenings, we've actually got the timeline full of higher quality media for the VFX shots, but it's only small little sections. It's only like 2 or 3 seconds rather than an entire day's worth of dailies. So that's how I kind of cheat my way to a high resolution later in the process by only getting the VFX shots back at SQ. VFX EH. So on V14 up there, what I do is when new VFX come in each day, my VFX editor, Tom Kemplin, and his assistant, Abby Hawkins, they cut the new VFX shots that come in on that track. So every morning when I come in, I can open up each reel and I see dotted along all the new shots and I check them. I write notes on them. And then when I've done the notes, I drop them down to V5. So I know that they know that I've looked at the shot and that if it's down and there are no notes, it means that I'm happy with the shot for that stage of the process. VFX turnovers is another track we have where we put markers about what shots need to be turned over in the next round of VFX turnovers. And then on V16 there, you've got the DI picture. This is what comes back from the DI, and you can see that's also DNxHR SQ. So the finished version of the movie that we have in the Media Composer is very, very high quality, Ultra HD, and it looks fabulous. So if we go down to the sound, this is pretty standard how people lay out their soundtracks, but I've got 5 dialogue tracks there, which are just mono dialogues. DX is short for dialogue, because then you can have DX, FX, and MX, kind of like is neat and tidy. But the dialogue's there, and then I've got a mono dialogue. It says soundbite mono DX on A6. So what will happen sometimes is I'll turn over a dialogue scene to our sound team, Soundbite, James Mather's company, and Simon Chase is our lead dialogue editor. So if there's a complex dialogue scene, I'll do a very, very careful dialogue edit on the Media Composer timeline and make sure it plays. But then to take it one step even further, I'll send it off to the sound team, and then Simon will work his magic. So you can see further down there, you can see some of the cleaned up dialogue that I got back that has been chopped up by me, and then there's little dissolves put to kind of smooth it out. So I'll mute the tracks on A1 to A5 and just play his mono dialogue track. And then sometimes they'll send us mono crowd back as well, so that as I'm working on the mix in the Media Composer timeline, I'll have a bit of crowd to put in there. And then obviously we've got the 5.1 dialogue stem, which is the finished version of the dialogue tracks. The way I've got this allocated is because we've got 1 dialogue and then 3 effects and then a background and then music. That uses up quite a lot of our real-time tracks on the Media Composer. So if you have a lot of live 5.1 tracks, you don't get many mono and stereo tracks left, but we've maxed them out here. So there you go. I've got 3 mono effects tracks, 3 stereo effects tracks, and then I've got stereo background tracks there underneath, 5.1 backgrounds, and then 3 stereo music tracks and a 5.1 music track. That's maxed out on all the real-time tracks that we can play. The only real trick that I use is in the stereo music tracks, I'll use an upmix plugin called UM226, which takes a stereo track and upmixes it to 5.1 in real time and adds a bit of subwoofer. So it gives the music more presence when you're playing stereo music tracks. And here you can see I have 2 different options for some of these tracks running. And usually one of them would be muted and I'd only have the live one, but I've unmuted them for the sake of seeing. And you can see where I did edits and I haven't healed them over yet because I was in a hurry. And we probably got the stem back before that. But that's how we break down the timeline. And you can see we use lots of colors as well. So we try to make sure that it's quite colorful and to look at, which kind of guides your eye around it a little bit more. So this is the first scene in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which is set on a submarine. And you see all the different colors that I've got there. I've got blues and reds and orange and pink. So each one of those is a color representing a major character. So blue is the captain, for example. I think yellow is the XO. So it basically shows me, though, how many shots of each character I've got in the timeline at a glance and who is speaking. So I can see who's doing the most talking by looking at the color of the clips. I'd actually use this in Top Gun Maverick to help me figure out how much presence each character had in the aerial sequences. But on Dead Reckoning, when I started cutting the dialogue scenes, I thought, you know what, we're going to do it for all the dialogue scenes. So if we scroll down a little bit further past the submarine, so here's the submarine, all this 5 minutes, there we go, 6 minutes, keep going down. And there you see the submarine ends at about 7 minutes. And then we crossfade through Amsterdam and we meet Ethan Hunt in Amsterdam. The shots that are green there are the food delivery guy who comes in. But then all the shots there that are blue are shots of Ethan. So you can see that there's quite a few shots of the delivery guy up front. And then there's that shot of Ethan there, which is where he's in the shadows. And then he steps out of the shadows there. So I can see at a glance how much of Ethan there is and when we're cutting to different angles of Ethan or when we're cutting to the delivery guy. But you get a sense there of what's going on. And then you can see there that there's a color effect there, which I think was for the flashback, because there's flashbacks to Marie. And you can see one thing that we did actually on the flashbacks is we've put little 1-frame dissolve, sometimes a 2-frame dissolve, to blunt the edge of the cuts when we were going to the black and white flashbacks, or the desaturated flashbacks in the movie, I should say. They're not quite black and white. But if you step through the timeline, if you get the movie on home entertainment and you step through, you'll see that there's like one frame where it's both images overlaid. And it just kind of gives the cuts a slightly softer, dreamier feel, which is an idea that Chris McCorry came up with and we really leaned into, actually. So whenever we're doing flashbacks, we would have these tiny little dissolves to just give you a slightly different emotional feel. And all the yellow down there on the dialogue track is the mission briefing. And there's the yellow with reverb on it, which is the reverb that I added just to give that first room in Amsterdam a little bit of presence. It's just a very, very subtle reverb. But what I do is I mix down the dialogue track, drop the reverb effect on it and render it, and then pan it left and right slightly back into the room in the 5:1 space. Where there's all the edits there, it's because I've chopped up, where we trimmed it down, I've chopped up the reverb. But that's what that is there. I sometimes put reverb. And the reason I don't do it in real time, some people I know have real-time reverb running using an RTAS effect. And I don't want it going all the way through. So that's why I just drop it on and render it for specific sections like that. And then here, the yellow stuff on the dialogue track is the mission briefing. So that's Henry Cerny playing Kittredge, reading the mission briefing. And we always write and rewrite and recut those, but that's what's going on there. And where the little red markers are, that's where I'll have written text of what each line is, so that when I'm looking at the markers, I can see what lines are playing where. It's just a useful way of reading it as well as seeing the clips. And so scroll down a little bit more, and there we've got the desert. So this is where all the desert action starts. Ethan on the horse and all that kind of stuff. And you can see there are lots of color effects. We really pushed the saturation on the desert and leaned into the hot yellow sun, and the dailies didn't go far enough there. So I've regraded all that as part of the offline edit. So yeah, that gives you an idea of how we work on the timelines here. Let's just quickly switch into Reel 2. And you'll see that Reel 2 starts with the scene in the Department of National Intelligence. It's a long dialogue scene. And you'll see at the beginning there, again, I've got all the different clip colors depending on which character is speaking. So that's why you've got like red and blue, and you've got kind of gold and orange and all those different colors there, which is all the different characters talking. And again, lots of color effects where I've graded all the dailies and pushed them in a slightly different direction. And then further down, you'll start to see when Kittredge and Ethan start speaking, you'll see there we've got, it's kind of like a dirty yellow color there, which is Kittredge. And again, we've got blue for Ethan Hunt. I've got FluidMorphs in there. There's little FluidMorph effects there, which is where we are tightening up little line deliveries and snipping out maybe 18 frames of a pause in the actor's performance to make the scenes clip along a little bit faster. When you're working on a long movie like this, which is, over 2.5 hours, we are concerned with every second of screen time, and we're very conscious of the audience's engagement minute to minute, even nuance to nuance through the scene. And it comes down to the frame, and we're looking at every single shot and going, can we make this tighter? Can we make this tighter? Can we make this better? Can we make this better? And so one of the tricks is using FluidMorphs to speed up performance in little cases. And sometimes we do respeeds in dialogue scenes. Sometimes we use FluidMorphs just as ways to speed through the dialogue scene a little quicker. So that's what you're seeing there. And then towards the end, that's all of Kittredge on the phone there. And then there's that last shot there, the last blue shot before the opening titles. If you just zoom in a little bit there, there's one blue shot before the blocks of yellow. So those last couple of shots there is when Ethan turns and fires the dart gun at Kittredge. And then you've got the main titles there, which is the yellow chunks. Then after that, we go straight to the airport. What happens is we go to Briggs and Degar standing in the air base. Then we go to Briggs in the air. And then you see where the colors start again. That's when we cut to the first class lounge in the airport, and we go to Luther and Benji and Ethan all talking. And you can see, if you scroll up a little bit to the subtitles track, I've got all the opening credits there. So I space them out and fade them up and down And usually with opening credits for a single card, it's 72 frames. And then you add an extra 12 frames for each individual person. So if you have 2 names up, then you have 3 seconds and 12 frames. And if you have 4 names up, you have 4 seconds. So that's the kind of standard length. But that's what that is me mapping out the secondary cards on that layer. So there you go. That's our timeline for Mission Impossible and how I use clip colors and how we work with visual effects and sound and music. And I hope that's been useful to you. Do let me know if you've learned anything, or if any of you have better ideas on how to do this. I always tell my team, if anyone has come up with a better idea, please tell me, because we all want to learn from each other and get the best tips on how to manage our Media Composer timelines as best we can and as efficiently as we can, so that everyone on the team can work quickly and understand what we're all doing. So let me know if you have any other ideas. Thanks very much, everybody.